Okay, so let's see if these things work. So very simple measure for a text of any kind. It's just going to be, and you could think about this. This could be the abundance of species, right? So how many lemurs there are of some kind in a forest, whatever it is, right? And then how many parrots or whatever. So you have some abundance measure, and it could be how much money you have in some stock or whatever it is. And then there's something you're measuring about it. And so we're going to use happiness, and you could certainly do, we have scores for these, but we've focused on this. Very simple thing, incredibly simple. We're just going to, right, if you say this word a lot and it's got a high happiness, it's going to tend to move things up, right? So we'll put an H in there, fine. Right, very simple. And what you'll see is that when and this took us a long while to sort of really see why this is, but yeah, the average happiness for a text is typically between 5 and 7. So once again, right, so this words are between 1 and 9, neutral is 5, but it tends to be above 5. So there are only certain kinds of texts that get below 5, and some for maybe a portion of them, like books, for example, and that's a pretty rough place to be, actually. So we'll get to that. All right, so here's let's walk through how we do this. Very simple. I actually made this before the king passed away. So this was not a tribute, but it became one. So and you'll see why this isn't great. This is using so the term for this is ANU, right? Effective norms for English words. I'm using ANU through the first part of this, and then we'll move into something else. So we have scores for these words. So we go through the text, and we're just going to break it up. We have scores for these words. We don't have scores for seen and always or you or careful. We don't have them, right? So we just ignore all of those. So that's a problem, right? So you imagine there's this text is coming into you, and you've got a lens, and it's got sort of stops for all of these words, and they just get stopped. Like imagine sort of like a physical instrument, like a telescope. You cannot see that part of the spectrum. So that's a worry, right? Because we're like, well, what if we had more words scored? Fair enough. Okay, that's fine. But this is what we're doing to start with. So we have these words. Lie is obviously a bit of a tricky one, right? And if you translate, so we'll show you some stuff later on where we translate between different languages, and I think the dominant, so if you're seeing the word in isolation, so you're getting its first meaning. We're taking people's overall sense of a word, right? And famously, some words have unbelievable ranges of meanings, right? So set was always the winner in the OED, like 800 meanings or something, but run is now in front, I think. Run has, you run a computer program, you run, I mean, it's really ridiculous, but because of context, we know what run means. And then there's another piece I just want to add to that, which is that there's a zip-like distribution for, some of you have seen this, and I've never finished this, but the frequency of usage of particular meanings of a word, right? So we take the word run, how often is it used in this way, this way, this way, this way, and then look at its distribution. And so there's some really rare usages, right? And it turns out to be another one of those skewed distribution. I think, for example, lie, if you translate that into Spanish, I think, so the word lying in particular, like I think in English people tend to think of that as telling an untruth as sort of the first reaction. I mean, there's how all of us might respond to it, but what I'm trying to say is I think there's what random people do. And in Spanish, lying translates into just like lying down. So people have so you'll see that doesn't work very well, right? Like that translation doesn't hold up. A very good way to run surveys, and it depends what you're doing, but a great way to run surveys is to ask, what do you think a random person would think of this or that, right? It puts people out of their mindsets. At least to add that as well. So we're just going to take all the, right, however many times these things appear, and that's what this frequency is, right? So this is, and this, let me be very clear, this is too small. This is too small a text, right? This is way too small a text, but I need something to illustrate. So you can't do it we would never do this. We would never do it for a sentence. We would never do it for just a little text like this. We're trying to measure something like temperature. Okay, so this is just purely for illustration. And so girl appears 4 times, And then we take these average scores that we had from the ANU study. So 2.79 was, right? So most people interpret this in a negative way. It's a low score. Love is all good, right? These are all good. Beauty, these are all positive words. So they're ranked by their valence. You can see we're still using V for valence, but happiness. And then you just simply, right, multiply all these things. So baby gets a whole bunch and girl gets a whole bunch. And then we just take the, this is really just the average, right? So this is the normalization. If you put it here, this will give you probability, FK divided by sum of FK. So that would, for Billie Jean, gives you 7.1. If you do it for all of Thriller, equally weighting each song, not by popularity, which turns out to be disappointingly hard, right? So Billboard doesn't even know how it used to rank things in the past. It's changed its algorithms. It's just, that's a really hard thing to do well. And you'll see we will vary between corpora where we have a popularity of things. So actually Twitter's pretty good because someone retweets things. Okay, if something gets retweeted a ton, that's okay actually, right? That's fine because it tells us the popularity of it, and that's important. That's what people are seeing. If Google Books, for example, Harry Potter gets 1 vote, and so does some other incredibly obscure thing that no one's ever read, right? So that's clearly wrong, right? That's just not right. So we'll kind of dance between those things a little bit, but we'll try to be as woke as possible, but scientifically woke. Yeah, we can't use that word. All right, so temperature-like measures, it's large numbers only. This is Michael Jackson's oeuvre as a whole, 6.4. So we think, what does that mean, right? And I'll give you some rankings to give some sense of this. But even that is too small. It's good to have, say, 10,000 words. That's a good bottom limit. So we're not going to use it at these small scales, certainly not at tweets. People do this all the time. It's unbelievable. They're so brazen about it. We evaluated each tweet and then we averaged over them. So maybe in the end it kind of worked out, but you can't go through that intermediate step and pretend it was okay. And why is it even okay to go from words to one big thing? Well, it's just we're making an instrument and we're going to test it out and see if it makes sense. Because we're going to throw away context, we're going to throw away local structure of words, and we're just going to see if it tells reasonable stories. And if it works okay for things that we, understand already, then we can go and use it in novel places. So it's a social measure of sentiment, as I said, because the scores we have for these words are how people feel when they see them, right? This is a complicated sum. That's a complicated sum. This is not an easy thing to process in any way, right? So even just getting its happiness is odd. We're going to see later on that the thing is tunable, which is pretty spectacular, a bit like a microscope, right? You can put different lenses on it, and then you can kind of dial how those lenses work. And so that's very enjoyable. I like that.